Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you some ideas on endgames. Well, let's get started with our first example. And this is the position we have. Let's see what's going on here. That's usually the first thing you need to do. You need to understand what's going on in the entire board and what's important about the position. That's one of the difficult things in chess, is to realize between the various things what is the priority, and that's what we'll try to do here. First of all, we should be always aware of the material balance on the board. So right here, white has a bishop and a pawn, while black has also a minor piece of equal value, a knight, and two pawns. So for the moment it is black who is ahead. Then the next thing we typically look at is the safety of the kings. Well, in endgames that's rarely an important factor, although sometimes it is, and it certainly is not here. Both kings are doing okay. Now in endgames, another important element is if either side has a passed pawn. Well, here both sides have passed pawns. However, the white pawn on g6 is held off by black's king, so it seems that black has no worries there. Now finally, let's get to the last element, but a real important one. Namely, it is the black knight in the corner. Now, when a knight is in the corner, as we know, it's very much restricted in its movements. Right now, in fact, that knight can only move safely to one square to c2. Okay, so now we're aware of this important element. Now, finally, one more thing that we need to be clear on. If white loses his last pawn, the pawn on g6, and even if black loses the remaining of his pieces, the knight as well as the two pawns, white still cannot win. And amazingly, yet in this position, white is to move and can win playing correctly. So I'd like you to think what may be the move, that magical move, that still brings white the win, the winning position in this endgame. Well, so now you know the most important priority is not to lose the pawn on g6, because if that pawn is lost, the game will be at least a draw for black, or maybe even win, depending on how the game continues, if the knight survives and black succeeds to promote one of his pawns. Okay, so ideally white would like to combine two tasks in this position. On one hand, to protect the pawn on g6, and on the other hand, not to let out the black knight from the corner to escape on c2. And there is one move that can accomplish all of the above at once. And that magical move is moving the bishop to f5, protecting the pawn as well as the c2 square. But you may say, but this bishop is not protected there. Well, it's true that it's not directly protected. The black king can capture the bishop. However, indirectly it was protected, because if black would do so, the white pawn would run away immediately, g7, and then g8. And the pawn is unstoppable. Obviously the black king cannot jump back to f7, and the black knight is far too far to catch the promotion square. Now what would happen on the other hand if after bishop f5 black does not capture the white bishop? For example, black could push the d pawn instead of capturing the bishop or moving the knight. So now what should white do? White should simply move the king towards the knight to a3 and then follow it up with moving to a2 or b2, attacking the black knight that's trapped. There is one more thing to pay attention to, that if black now plays a4 with the idea to protect the b3 square and help the escape of the knight from the corner, then white will simply capture that pawn and nothing changed. The black king still cannot safely capture the bishop without allowing the white pawn to get promoted. The knight still has no escape, and then again the white king will just walk back all the way to the corner, capturing the black knight, and then move towards the black pawn, capture that last pawn, and then aid the white bishop and pawn on the king's side to make sure that pawn will get promoted and then win the game. Playing d3 wouldn't help either, as that pawn now is on the same diagonal with the bishop. The bishop will just capture that pawn and still, of course, control the c2 square. The bishop is safely protecting white's last pawn, which is very important, and then, as we said, the white king will go after the black knight and win it, and then move over to the king's side to help. A very instructional endgame. Let's move on to our next example, which will be quite entertaining. Here we are. Look at this position. The first thing to notice is that it is black to move. How do we know that? Well, we know not only because I'm telling you so, but also because you can see that the black king is in a check. And in any position that we see that one side is in a check, we know that it is that side to move. Now, in this position, the black king cannot move, but that doesn't mean that black is in checkmate. As we know, there always may be three different responses to a check, that is, moving the king, blocking the check, or capturing the attacker, the piece that gives us the check. Well, in this particular position, there is actually only one option: to block the check. And in fact, blocking it by promoting the black pawn on g2. Now that pawn may promote to various pieces. Generally, when we have the opportunity to promote a pawn, it's almost automatically should be a queen. Yet, there are exceptions to that. In this example, the interesting part is that even though black gets the opportunity to promote the pawn to a queen, yet white can save the game. In fact, white is in check now, so things seem to be really bad, because if now the white rook captures the new black queen, the black pawn from h2 will recapture and with a check, and it seems that black will simply be up a queen. However, quite amazingly, white can save the game here. By simply moving out of the check to f3, of all things, and leaving the rook hanging on e1. And quite impressively, now after queen takes the rook, guess what happened? It's stalemate. The white king has no moves, neither do the white pawns, and the king is not in a check, and therefore we're talking about stalemate, which is a result where the two sides split the point, each side gets half a point. So that's certainly a lucky and beautiful escape for white. Now you may wonder, what if the black queen does not capture the white rook? Well, then things are even worse for black, because the black queen is pinned. It cannot move anywhere back on the g-file, all on the diagonal. And of course, if the queen moves to f1, that would be suicidal, because the white rook would immediately capture it, and with checkmate. So in other words, black has no choice right now but capture the white rook on e1, and that will result in stalemate. Now let's check out one more thing, namely what happens if right now black promotes the pawn to a rook. Well, it's a very logical idea, because now if white would play king f3, that would be silly, because now rook captures rook, and we're not talking about any kind of stalemate, because the white king has two free squares to go to. So that's out of question for white. And yet white still can save the game here as well. Remember, black still has a far advanced passed pawn on h2, so white needs to be careful. And the best move right now is to play rook f1, which limits black's options to a single choice, namely to trade rooks, and then white captures back, and now for a change it is black who is stalemated. It's black who doesn't have a single move, and therefore again the game is a draw. What a beautiful, beautiful example. Let's move on to our third example in this lesson, when we're again seeing a knight versus bishop endgame, just like in the first example. And here again we see passed pawns running, and we can see the clear difference. The white pawn is running freely, while the black pawn already has the white king stopping it in its promotion square. In view that black has a bishop that's running on the light squares, which is opposite from where the white king stands and the promotion square, we can tell that black hardly has any chances to win, because it's very, very hard, or perhaps even impossible, to chase the white king out of its current position. However, in this example, white is not only hoping to survive, but actually white hopes and can win if it finds the correct way. The most natural move right now, which would be to advance the pawn to a7 to then promote it, would be a big mistake, because it would allow the black bishop to get on that same diagonal where the pawn is about to get promoted, and get ready to capture the new queen if it gets promoted on a8. And the problem is the white knight wouldn't have an opportunity from here on to chase the bishop away, because it is a long diagonal where the bishop is at, so therefore any time the knight would attack the bishop would just find another square of the 8 squares available on this long diagonal to run to. Of course, one thing that black has to be very careful of, not to allow a fork that would attack the black king with a check and the bishop at the same time. For example, if white would right now play knight f5 with the idea to then check the black king and attack the black bishop, then the bishop would need to find a square, for example, all the way here in the corner, that's far enough or not in a position where the knight could fork those two pieces. And now, a check, the king could simply move out anywhere, and black wouldn't be in any danger of losing the game. So let's go back to the beginning and try to think, how can white still win this game? Well, obviously the trick has to be to prevent that bishop from getting onto that diagonal from where it be ready to hold off the passed pawn on the a file. And the brilliant move is to play knight c6. This move on one hand blocks off the diagonal, but more importantly it positions the knight in a way that it will be ready to give a fork if the black bishop indeed would choose to come to f3, and then knight d4, the same fork we talked about earlier, checks the black king, and then after the king moves out of the check, the knight is ready to capture the bishop, and then there's no one to hold off the white pawn. On the other hand, if in the position after knight c6, black chooses to retreat the bishop to e8, attacking the knight, Then again, white could check actually from either a5 or d4. When the king moves away, the knight still guards that entry square of the bishop from where it could hold of the white pawn. White would advance the pawn. If bishop comes to c6, the knight captures it, and white doesn't worry much about losing the knight when succeeds in getting a new queen. And now this tremendous material advantage will be a relatively easy win for white. We're not going to get into the details at this moment on how, but trust me, the cooperation between the white king and queen will not be a terribly difficult task to win this game. Let's see the next example, where we have different material distribution. We even have queens on the board. In this position, we see that black has the material advantage, having a queen and rook versus queen and knight. And one thing is extremely important to remember about such situations with queens on the board, and especially when one side also has a rook, that if it would be black's turn, black would be winning because of the coordinated checks between the black queen and rook usually very easily result either checkmate or, in this case, maybe winning the queen. However, in our example, it is white's turn, and because of the special unfortunate positioning of the black pieces, white is able to combine two tactical elements. One is a fork, and then a second one, a skewer. So, what white can and should do right now is to sacrifice his knight by moving it to d3, which is a fork, attacking the black king and queen. And when the black rook captures that knight, then create a skewer by either queen c7 or queen c8, check, forcing the king to get out of the way, and then pick up the queen. It's clear that white gained a lot of material with this combination and reached a theoretically won endgame. In this lesson, we're not focusing on the technical part on how to win with a huge material advantage, but are focusing on how to get that material advantage, or in some cases, like the next example, how to checkmate. Let's see the next example, which is another beautiful endgame. And here again, just like in the last position, black is an exchange up, having queen and rook versus queen and bishop. And yet it is white who can win. And it's very tricky, because if white is not accurate and doesn't find the precise move, they will be suffering in finding ways how to save the game. While in this particular moment, because of the cramped positioning of the black pieces, they kind of all packaged up in one part of the board. Because of that, white is able to force a checkmate in just two moves. A simple check followed by checkmate. Well, the way to achieve that is to simply give a check on a3. Now, if the king goes to b1, the checkmate arrives from the corner. Very elegant checkmate. Or, if the king goes to d2, the checkmate arrives from e3, which is called an epaulette type of checkmate. Very beautiful, one of my favorite ones. And let's see another example that also has a similar material distribution. Here we are. Here the element is quite different. As you can see, the black pieces are spread out a lot more, and they are not in each other's way like they were in the previous example. Here the element is different. The black queen is in an unprotected square, and white has a potential discovery in the air, meaning that when the white bishop right now moves to b5, the c file opens up, and the bishop didn't only check the black king, but the white queen is also threatening the black queen. So it seems like the solution has been found, as if rook takes bishop, queen takes queen, and white achieved a major material gain. However, black can try to be smarter and move the king out of the check and protect the queen. And now, amazingly, white has another beautiful move, sacrificing the bishop yet another time with kind of a skewer, and then if the king captures the bishop, then the king moved away from the queen, which again allows white to win the queen and then later the game. A very nice example. Let's move on to our next one, when we learn yet about another tactical endgame opportunity. Here again, the important factor is the passed pawn. White has a far advanced pawn on g6, which is almost ready to advance and get promoted. To do that immediately, though, it would be a blunder, allowing black to check immediately and then capture white's last pawn. Of course, after king takes and rook takes, the game is pretty much an automatic draw. So what can white do to prevent black coming to e7 and then going after white's last pawn? Well, here is what white can and should do. White should actually sacrifice his rook. Why? To get the black rook distracted, to get the black rook away from the opportunity to hold off the white pawn, and now that white pawn is ready to advance, and there's no one to stop it from promoting on the next move. Why? Because the black king is in an unfortunate position on the same forced rank as the black rook is on, and therefore the black rook is unable to jump over the king and get to g4, so therefore black will lose the game. The white pawn will get promoted. And here is our final example, which will be a lot of fun again. In this position, things seems to be pretty bad for white, with the black pawn about to get promoted on f1. And there's nothing that white can do to stop that pawn from promoting. Even if white captures the black bishop right now, the pawn promotes, moreover, with a checkmate. The amazingly beautiful move is to play bishop e1, and this is the move that's good enough to save the game. Why? If pawn captures the bishop with promoting, the white king will capture the new promoted piece, and as we learned, king and bishop versus king is an automatic draw because there is no imaginable checkmate. That's true, but what happens if the black pawn promotes on f1 to a queen? Well, what happens then is that the white bishop gets pinned, and therefore white has no moves, which means the position is stalemate, and that means that the game is a draw. Quite beautiful. The same would happen if black would promote the pawn to a rook. It would be, again, a stalemate. And finally, what happens if black promotes the pawn to a knight? Well, in that case, white will simply move the bishop, and for example, after knight e3 check, run with the king, and without pawns, generally a piece advantage is not sufficient to win. Like bishop, knight versus bishop is a draw. There was only one last trap white had to avoid, not to move the king to c1 onto the discovery, because then the knight will jump to c4, creating a discovered check, as well as attacking the bishop, and then if the bishop is lost and black will be up 2 pieces, bishop and knight, that's a theoretical win. Well, I hope you got a bit better ideas of endgames and realize that even in the endgames there can be tactics. You always need to watch out for tactics at any stage of the game. Thank you for listening, and be back next week for some more chess ideas. Bye bye.